You're listening to the Diplomats podcast on Asian geopolitics. As always, I'm your host, Ankit Panda, broadcasting from Washington, D.C. Today on the podcast, we're going to return to a fairly familiar topic to most listeners of the show, which is North Korea. However, unlike most episodes we've done on North Korea recently, we unfortunately won't be talking about ballistic missiles or nuclear weapons, but we will be talking about the ways in which North Korea enables its persistent pursuit of these technologies. Today is April 13th, and actually earlier today, the U.S. Office of the Department of Director of National Intelligence released its worldwide threat assessment, in which the intel community, as it has observed in recent years, observed that despite the current level of pressure on North Korea, Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, and his regime are, quote, probably do not view the current level of pressure as enough to require a fundamental change in approach. So the international community, especially in 2016 and 2017, came around as North Korea was testing all kinds of new ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons to put in place a much more wide-ranging sanctions regime on the country, backed by multiple resolutions at the United Nations Security Council. This became a contentious issue, for instance, during the bout of diplomacy that took place in 2018 and 2019 when the North Koreans sought sanctions relief. But as we've learned since then, the North Koreans have grown quite adept at evading sanctions and continuing their pursuit of illicit ballistic missile activity and pursuit of nuclear weapons more generally. So to talk through some of these issues today, I'm quite pleased to have with me Lucas Kuo, who is a senior analyst at C4ADS, where he works in the counterproliferation cell, specializing in North Korean illicit shipping and procurement networks. Lucas, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And alongside Lucas, I'm also delighted to be joined by Joe Byrne, a research analyst at the Royal United Services Institute in London. Joe, thank you for joining me as well.
Thanks for having me.
So Lucas and Joe are two among a group of authors who recently worked on a joint C4ADS RUSI report called Black Gold, Exposing North Korea's Oil Procurement Networks. And this report continues and builds on a lot of great work that C4ADS and RUSI have done in this area, looking at North Korea's illicit maritime smuggling activities and networks across the Indo-Pacific region. So today we'll talk through some of those issues, but I've said a fair bit. So Lucas, let's start with you. Before we sort of jump into this, can you tell our listeners a little bit about how North Korea generally relies on the outside world for its energy needs? How do North Korean energy imports intersect additionally with its WMD and missile programs? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So just like any other modern state, North Korea depends on oil to power its economy and, of course, its military. So from heating lamps to farm tractors to the transporter erector launcher vehicles that carry North Korea's ICBMs, you need oil for all of that. But the problem that has plagued North Korea for decades is that it's completely dependent on foreign imports of oil for two main reasons. So first is that North Korea doesn't have any proven oil reserves, which means it can't extract on its own the crude oil that is refined into the variety of useful petroleum products like diesel and gasoline. And much of that crude oil actually reportedly comes from China through a pipeline at the China-North Korea border. The second reason is because North Korea has a very limited oil refining capacity. So I believe most recent reports on the subject suggest that there is just one active refinery at the moment that is responsible for most of the domestic production of refined petroleum products. So ultimately, this is a major geostrategic vulnerability for North Korea, and it's one that the international community has exploited as a way to increase or decrease pressure on North Korea over its WMD and missile programs. So the UN Security Council likely targeted this vulnerability when it passed two resolutions in 2017 that placed annual caps on North Korea's imports of crude and refined petroleum products after its nuclear and ballistic missile tests that year. But as we've seen from reporting and an analysis from the UN, from other member states, as well as other research groups, North Korea has easily breached those caps every year since the imposition of the oil sanctions. And that is due, likely in no small part, to the highly capable foreign smuggling networks that help procure and deliver oil on its behalf.
So, Joe, tell us a little bit about these networks. We'll dig in a little bit to the specifics that you unveil in your recent report. But generally speaking, how has North Korea adapted its fuel procurement strategy since the implementation of the last round of Security Council resolutions in 2017?
Yeah, sure. So as Lucas said, in late 2017, December 2017, the UN imposed a 500,000 barrel cap on the amount of oil that was supposed to be imported into North Korea. All the deliveries are meant to be, they were meant to notify the UN Security Council, and Russia and China, both the pipelines going to North Korea, have to report on how much oil they are pumping in each year. But at the end of 2017, we saw a drastic change in the way that North Korea was procuring its oil. So normally you would have vessels sailing into ports from North Korea, from China, places. But then we saw a change in terms of the vessels' activity. They were changing up their modus operandi and traveling into international waters and doing STS transfers from foreign flag tankers. This then changed again as the sanctions went on, and these foreign flag tankers became more and more important into the oil procurement strategy of North Korea. We saw at the start of 2019 foreign flag tankers directly delivering to North Korea, and these tankers are really important for the oil procurement strategy because they seem to be larger than North Korean tankers by over double. And so they could carry more oil. There was less contact with the illicit market, and it was more efficient. And that is just one of the reasons how they can seemingly break the oil cap many times over, and it's become the center of their oil procurement strategy. The latest UN panel report showed that even more vessels, even more foreign flag tankers have now started delivering to North Korea. So it shows that this strategy is working for them, and they're continuing to adapt it and increase the volume of vessels that are delivering to North Korea now.
Right, right. So, coming around to now your recent report. So, you specifically in your report dig into North Korea's liaising with organized criminal networks around Asia. Additionally, in addition to multinational fuel companies, and you talk about sort of nodes in this illicit procurement network based in Taiwan, which I found to be quite interesting. China and also Singapore. Southeast Asia, of course, has been a somewhat understudied locus of North Korean activity, but in recent years has gained more prominence, particularly since the assassination of Kim Jong-nam in Kuala Lumpur International Airport in 2017, I think drew more attention to North Korean activities in that part of the world. But tell us a little bit about these specific networks. Sort of, give us the executive summary of what you outline in your recent report regarding these networks. Lucas, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So, I believe one of the most interesting findings from our report is, that the evidence that we've uncovered suggests that transnational organized crime provide North Korea with the capacity and capability to smuggle fuel at scale. And so, what we mean by this is that North Korea has actually tapped into this regional black market for fuel, one that has existed long before the North Korean sanctions regime came into place. And so for decades, because of different pricing regimes across Northeast Asia, China, Taiwan, South Korea, these countries all have different pricing regimes for oil, for fuel, that are designed to protect domestic industries or support, other sectors such as fishing. And so what this has resulted in is actually the creation of arbitrage opportunities throughout the region. And smuggling networks, have taken advantage of those arbitrage opportunities and have developed these logistical know-how, and the networks and the contacts and tradecraft in order to move fuel, from across the region, and to sell it at extravagant profits. So this regional black market for fuel has also cultivated this community of sophisticated smugglers that North Korea has likely engaged in order to procure fuel for its own needs. And so, I think one of the biggest misconceptions of, or perhaps one of the one of the main things that we have to move away from is that North Korea's sanctions evasion networks operate in a vacuum. And what we discovered from our investigations and our research is that this certainly is not the case. And North Korea, at least within the oil smuggling perspective, is likely just one customer in this black market.
Mm-hmm. So let's dig in now on Taiwan a little bit. So in your report, you described Taiwan as a key locus. Tell us a little bit about why North Korean smugglers are drawn to Taiwan in particular. I mean, obviously there's the island's sort of convenient strategic location along significant sea lines of communication in the Indo-Pacific. But what else draws North Koreans to Taiwan?
Yeah, so I mean, in our report, we actually brought out a number of case studies of North Korean oil smuggling networks that linked back to Taiwan. Some of the very first cases of North Korean fuel smuggling networks discovered after the imposition of oil sanctions involved, Taiwanese nationals or that owned and managed vessels that were smuggling fuel that were loaded in from Taiwanese ports and brought it out into international seas for transfer to North Korean vessels.
Yeah, so as Lucas is saying, Taiwan has been the main procurement node for lots of North Korea's illicit oil procurement in the past. At the end of 2017, when lots of foreign flag tankers were starting to do STS transfers with North Korean vessels in the East China Sea and international waters, lots of the companies were registered and based in Taiwan. Now, this could be because of Taiwan's core central place in regional oil trading. It also, as Lucas said before, has subsidized fuel, so it leads into that environment where lots of fuel smugglers that have been entrenched in the area for years and years and years operate, and North Korea is just one customer from these large fuel smuggling networks that they've tapped into that network of oil smuggling. Mm-hmm. It could also be the fact that Taiwan is not a UN member state, and also that these organized crime groups are very sophisticated, and they're very entrenched in the oil smuggling of the region.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the research methods that you use, because I think one of the most impressive things about this kind of work is the fact that it's all, neither of you have clearances. You're working entirely in the open source, tracking these illicit shipping networks and this proliferation finance activity. Tell our listeners who might be less versed with this genre of open source research how exactly both of your teams at C4ADS and RUSI go about this work. What are some of the techniques and tools that you use, and what really is the level of confidence that you ultimately have in your findings based on the fact that you're working primarily with open sources?
Yeah, sure. So it's really, from my point of view, I can't speak for Lucas and C4ADS, but it's really a layering game. So we try and get access to lots of different openly available sources. So that can be AIS data for tracking ships, satellite imagery for actually seeing the vessels in real life, knowing what the vessels look like. We can access shipping records, and then you have the more traditional open source information, so news sources and academic articles. And it's all about building a picture with what you have. And actually, the open source information that is available to you now is becoming more and more, it's becoming richer and more freely available and becoming more affordable. So in our experience, it's all about layering what you can get your hands on. So you have your AIS data with your satellite imagery to prove the vessel is the vessel you're talking about, and then you have corporate records to see who's owned it, who's operated it historically, and then we go from there.
Right. Lucas, did you want to add anything on that?
No, I think Joe described the process very eloquently. It is indeed a layering game. We want to pull together as many sources as possible that is publicly available, which there are many. And I guess the fundamental concept when we're investigating these networks, these maritime networks, is that these ships that we're seeing all the time, their images plastered all over the media reports and things like that. They are ultimately assets that are used by individuals and entities to conduct the illicit activity. So a lot of the geospatial data and analytical techniques that we use to track these ship-to-ship transfers or direct deliveries of fuel to North Korea, this is just building up the evidence for us to identify which networks are responsible for smuggling fuel to North Korea. And so once we're able, the most important thing is being able to take the investigation from sea back onto land, where we have access to a wide variety of sources such as corporate registry records, judicial records, customs data, all of this, which were actually used in our report in order to create this comprehensive picture of the network, right? So not only is it, okay, this individual or company is the owner or manager of the ship, but what other characteristics of this network makes it determines its role or influence within North Korea's oil supply chain. So, for some of these networks that we profiled in the report, we started seeing these individuals pop up in multiple court records, indicating that they had a previous record of smuggling of other products. And so this tells us that they have a history of engaging in smuggling behavior. They may have developed methods in order to acquire access or access to to waters or certain officials that may look the other way while they carry out these activities. And so therefore the importance of these networks changes significantly once we have that context. So just to bring it back, as Joe mentioned, it is indeed layering all these various data sources in order to paint that get a comprehensive picture of what this network is doing.
Mm-hmm. So as we close out the discussion today, let's turn a little bit to the prescriptive side here. So, leaving aside the question of whether or not sanctions will change Kim Jong-un's decision-making about the value of his nuclear weapons, insofar as the enforcement of sanctions is concerned and sort of choking off North Korea's ability to continue procuring fuel, in particular illicitly, based on your research findings, what would you say needs to be done, and by who here? I mean, we have a number of stakeholders and states. We have Taiwan, non-UN member state. We have obviously the United States, regional states, China, with a complicated now geopolitical relationship with the United States and a much closer relationship with North Korea than it had back in 2016, 2017 when these UNSCRs were originally agreed. So if you had to sort of leave our listeners with a few prescriptive ideas, what would they be? Joe, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, sure. So as we showed in our report, one way that states can really look to do more on these networks is look at the links between transnational organized crime. And this is probably a place where member states are already doing a lot of work countering fuel smuggling going in or out of their countries. But it's threading that connection between the organized crime groups who may be facilitating this illicit activity and North Korea may be a customer of these organizations or these networks, where member states or where countries can really target efforts to disrupt this activity.
Lucas, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to emphasize Joe's point here, connecting transnational organized criminal activities to North Korean sanctions evasion is actually a very important distinction to make, right? So there are policy implications for this, as well as it opens up different courses of action on the enforcement side. So on policy, there are a whole suite of regulatory measures that can be taken to sort of approach to disrupt these smuggling networks that are providing fuel to North Korea. As we've demonstrated in the report from our investigations, these North Korea-linked fuel smuggling networks have connections to smuggling activities involving, cigarettes and other commodities that may be of interest from a different agency's perspective. And so, by activating those, by breaking down this conception of treating all North Korean oil smuggling networks as part of this sanctions evasion issue, we are able to activate other agencies' capabilities and investigative powers and policy options in order to counter these networks. So, just to provide an example, China actually has, announced several initiatives within the last year to break up a lot of these maritime smuggling networks within its own waters. So there are a lot of vessels in China that are smuggling oil and other commodities, and the Chinese officials, from the Coast Guard and customs bureaus, they are cracking down on these networks, and they made a big show out of it. And part of the reason is because intrinsically these networks are not good for China's economy and society. There may be involvement of corrupt officials, damage to the local economy, and so we can kind of change the incentive structure for some of these member states to act on these networks. Talk on a different wavelength, but ultimately arrive at the same objective, which is to take these networks out of the game. Then we might be able to make some progress. So instead of framing these oil smuggling networks as part of a North Korea sanctions evasion problem, by turning it on its head and saying this is a transnational organized crime problem, look, it has effects on your own domestic economy and society, and in society, then perhaps we might be able to achieve different, fresh approaches to this common problem.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I mean, ultimately this is this long-running now cat and mouse game, and we've had success with this. In a different sense in the past, right? We can look at the Proliferation Security Initiative and sort of the crackdown on North Korean missile smuggling, particularly in the early to mid 2000s under the Bush administration, and that largely succeeded. Obviously, the challenges today are quite different, but I think you're right that conceiving of this in this new way might be useful. And in the meantime, North Korea has other tricks up its sleeve to continue financing its activities. Things like cryptocurrency and cybercrime more generally. But fuel is ultimately fuel. They will need to continue importing these raw materials for the critical inputs for their WMD programs at the end of the day. So, I think this work that you both are involved in continues to be very important. But gentlemen, we're unfortunately out of time. But I wanted to thank you both for taking the time to come on the show and talk through your recent research here. So, Lucas, Joe, thanks a lot for joining me on the show today.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks very much.
All right, my pleasure. I hope to have you on soon. Thanks for taking the time. For listeners, if you like what you heard on the podcast, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you've been a subscriber for a while but you haven't yet left us a review, please do that. It really helps get the word out about the show and really helps us acquire new listeners as well. You can leave us a review on any podcast portal where you get your episodes. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll be back next week with more.